My father's drunken confession destroyed my life. I always thought my childhood was normal, safe, happy. But one late-night conversation with my father shattered everything I believed. Part 1. Shadows Beneath the Surface. My name's Andrew, and I used to think my family was normal. We had backyard barbecues, cheesy Christmas sweaters, and every Sunday, we'd pile in a dad's truck to go fishing. Just the boys. Me, my brother Adam, and our Uncle Mark. Those days were golden. The kind of golden that burns into your memory with the warmth of nostalgia and the illusion of safety. But one conversation, one drunken night with my father, shattered it all. It began last winter. The kind of night where the snow outside thickens the silence and makes the walls of the house feel too close. My dad had invited me over to watch the game and share a drink. I should have known something was off. He never invited me over just to drink. He poured himself a double shot of whiskey, and I followed his lead. One drink turned into 2, then 3. And that's when it started. He leaned back in his recliner, glass in hand, and stared at nothing in particular. "You remember your Uncle Mark?" he asked suddenly, voice tight. "Of course," I said, smiling. "He was my favorite growing up. He always made things fun. Took us to the beach, built us a damn tree house by hand. Remember?" Dad didn't smile. He didn't even blink. I should have stopped him. I paused, the words sticking in my throat. Stopped him from what? His glass clinked against the table. His hand trembled, and then he said it. "He hurt you, Andrew. You just don't remember." The silence that followed was so sharp, I could hear my heartbeat thudding like war drums. "What the hell are you talking about?" He looked at me, eyes wet but steady. "You were 7. You came home crying one day, and you wouldn't tell us why. Your mother thought you were just being sensitive, but I saw the signs." "No," I said instinctively. "No, that doesn't make sense. Uncle Mark was. He was always there for us. He was a monster." Dad cut in, voice gravelly and full of shame. I didn't want to believe it either. I stood up, pacing the living room, my mind racing with disbelief. "Why would you say this now, after all these years?" "Because he's dying," my dad said quietly. "And he called me last week. He wants to see you, to apologize. He said he needs to confess." 1,000 fragmented memories swirled in my head. Uncle Mark teaching me how to ride a bike, letting me shoot his airsoft guns in the backyard, bringing me those sour candies I loved. None of it matched the horror I was being told. "I don't remember any of that," I whispered. "I know," Dad said. "You blocked it out. Kids do that." I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something. But I just stood there, frozen, as my childhood collapsed around me. "You let him stay in our lives," I finally said, barely recognizing my own voice. "Even after you suspected." "I was weak," he admitted. "I thought I could keep you safe without blowing the family apart. But I failed. And now you deserve the truth." The truth. That word suddenly felt poisonous. Part 2. The phone call. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my car, parked in front of my apartment complex, trying to make sense of what my father had told me. My entire childhood now felt like a half-burned photograph, edges singed by lies and secrets. When the sun finally rose, I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make. I called Uncle Mark. The phone rang 5 times before he picked up. His voice was thin and raspy, like it had been run through gravel. "Hello. It's me," I said. "Andrew." A pause, then a soft sigh. "I was hoping you'd call." I didn't respond. "I suppose your father told you." He continued, his tone a mix of guilt and resignation. "Is it true?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "Did you do something to me when I was a kid?" Another long silence. Then, quietly, "Yes. And I hate myself for it every day." The ground beneath me might as well have vanished. My fingers trembled so violently, I dropped my phone and had to pick it up from the car floor. "What?" I croaked. "Why would you do that to a child?" "I was sick," he said, twisted. "But I loved you. That's what made it worse. I never wanted to hurt you, Andrew. But I did. And I'll carry that shame to my grave." I wanted to yell, to curse, to drive over and break his teeth in. But all I could do was cry silently, choking on a decade of repressed confusion. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew better. Instead, he asked to see me. In person. "Just once," he said. "I want to say it to your face. I owe you that much." I hung up without answering. A week later, I showed up at the hospice care center where he was staying. Not because I forgave him, not because I wanted closure, but because I needed to see the face of the man who shattered my childhood. He was thinner than I remembered. His once thick beard was gone, replaced with a sparse shadow of gray. Tubes snaked into his arms, and an oxygen machine hissed softly beside him. When he saw me, tears welled up in his eyes. "Andrew," he rasped. I stood at the doorway for a long moment, debating whether to leave. But my feet moved on their own. "I don't know what to say to you," I said bitterly. "You don't have to say anything. Just let me speak," he pleaded. I sat down, arms folded tightly, heart beating like a war drum in my chest. He began to talk about how he was abused as a child, about how no one believed him, and how he never healed. He spoke of how darkness, when unspoken, grows fangs, and how he let that darkness consume him. "I was supposed to protect you," he said, choking on his own words. "Instead, I became the thing you should have been protected from." Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time, I saw a man truly haunted by himself. "I won't ask you to forgive me," he said, "but I need you to know it wasn't your fault. Nothing about it was your fault." The words hit harder than I expected. Even if I couldn't remember everything, part of me had always felt broken, guilty, dirty, like something had been wrong with me from the beginning. But it wasn't me. It was him, and now he was dying. Later that night, I told my dad everything. He cried harder than I've ever seen. Said he should have killed Mark when he first suspected. I didn't argue. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us grieving a life that could have been different. Then he told me something else. "Your mom knew too." That broke me. "She saw the signs before I did," Dad said. "But she begged me to keep quiet. Said destroying the family would be worse than the truth. She chose peace over me." I whispered. "I should have fought harder," he said, ashamed. "I should have burned it all down." When I was a teenager, I thought life would eventually make sense. That the people we trust most wouldn't lie, wouldn't betray us, wouldn't carry secrets like poison daggers behind their backs. I never expected my reality to fracture so completely over a conversation with my father. It started as just another evening, a casual drink between father and son, sharing laughter, memories, and maybe a little too much whiskey. My dad was halfway through his third glass when his eyes started to cloud with something heavier than alcohol. There was a silence that fell between us, heavy and unnerving. He stared at the bottle, swirling the amber liquid slowly, and then, without looking at me, he said, "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." That one sentence changed everything. I didn't expect it to be about Uncle Mark, my childhood hero. Uncle Mark wasn't just a relative. He was a myth, a legend in my small world. He had an endless arsenal of cool stories, video games, gadgets, and a way of making every boring Saturday feel like Christmas morning. He was spontaneous, always grinning, and the only adult who seemed to understand kids weren't just small furniture to be seen and not heard. He took me and my friends on spontaneous beach trips, showed us how to make homemade fireworks, and even let us stay up all night watching horror movies while eating ice cream straight from the tub. Looking back, it felt too good to be true, and that's because it was. Dad hesitated, fingers tightening around his glass. "Mark wasn't who you thought he was. He did something terrible." My stomach dropped. At first, I thought he was going to say something dumb, like Mark had borrowed money and never returned it, or cheated at poker. Something petty, something that would make us sigh and go back to our drinks. But no, his voice cracked. He hurt someone close. I remember freezing. "What do you mean? Who?" My dad looked at me, his face pale. "You." I blinked. I couldn't comprehend what I just heard. "What? You were 7, he continued, barely above a whisper. "You came home one day, different. You stopped eating. You had nightmares. I asked you what happened, but you didn't say anything. Your mom thought it was just a phase, but I knew better." I sat there, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. He told me that he started keeping an eye on Mark after that. He couldn't prove anything, but he felt something was off. He was too close, too eager to spend time alone with you. And then I found the camera. I felt sick. Every memory I had of Uncle Mark began unraveling. The camping trips, the secret gifts, the long hours spent in his basement playing games. He had a locked drawer I was never allowed to open. I thought it was full of adult stuff, bills or tools. It never occurred to me it might have been hiding something so dark. I started to remember things in pieces. Flashes. The feel of a cold hand on my shoulder. The fear of going down to his basement. The time I faked being sick so I wouldn't have to go to his house. Dad had apparently confronted him. They had a massive fight, but Mark denied everything. And because I didn't remember, because I had blocked it all out, they couldn't go to the police. That wasn't the worst part. The only reason I didn't kill him that day, my dad said, was because your mother begged me not to. She said we had no evidence. That would destroy the family. So instead, they cut ties. Slowly, without explanation. Mark moved across the country a year later, and I never saw him again. But Dad had lived with that guilt for years. He thought he'd fail me by not doing more. And now, after all this time, he couldn't carry the weight anymore. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, confusion, pain. My childhood had been a lie. A carefully built illusion hiding something monstrous. But that wasn't where it ended. I became obsessed. I dug through old boxes, photo albums, anything that might give me clues. And eventually, I found it. A small SD card tucked into the back of an old comic book in the attic. It was dusty, half broken, but my heart told me it mattered. I had it scanned by a recovery expert, and what I found confirmed everything. There were images. Horrible, blurred photos taken in the basement. Not explicit, but wrong. Me looking scared. Mark too close. Too intimate. I showed it to my dad. He broke down in tears. We went to the police. The file was handed off to a special unit. But after so many years, the statute of limitations had passed. Mark couldn't be arrested for what he'd done to me, but they could investigate further. And they did. What they found was worse than I imagined. Mark had continued. Other children. In his new town, he had volunteered at a youth center. No one knew. No one suspected. Until now. The investigation blew up. His house was searched, and more evidence was found. Photos, videos, journals. He was arrested. I went to the trial. I looked him in the eye as he was sentenced to 28 years in prison. He didn't say a word. Not once. Not even when they asked him if he had anything to say to the victims. He just stared straight ahead, hollow. But justice didn't bring peace. I started therapy. I started writing. I tried to reclaim the years that had been stolen from me. But some nights, I still wake up with my chest tight, my breath short. I wonder how many versions of me could have existed if he hadn't touched my life. My dad still blames himself. Every time we talk, I can see it in his eyes, that deep-rooted guilt. But I don't blame him anymore. He did what he could in a world that rarely believes survivors without proof. I blame the silence. The culture of protecting family over truth. The years lost because no one wanted to make a scene. If you're reading this, and you've ever felt like something was wrong, even if you can't remember exactly what, it's worth looking into. Your instincts matter. Your memories matter. And you matter. I used to think I'd never get past it. But now I'm reclaiming my story. Word by word. Memory by memory. And that's how monsters lose their power when we speak. When we shine light into their shadows. I'm not his victim anymore. I am a survivor. After the sentencing, I thought I'd feel closure, but what I felt was silence. A heavy, suffocating kind of silence. Like standing in a house after a hurricane has passed. Everything's still and broken. The air too clean, too quiet. The world hadn't ended, but something inside me had, and I didn't know how to rebuild it. My therapist told me healing wasn't linear, that I'd have days where I'd feel like I could breathe again, followed by days when even getting out of bed would feel impossible. She was right. Some mornings I'd make coffee, sit by the window, and almost forget the weight pressing down on my chest. Other days, I'd crumble from something as small as a smell, sawdust, cologne, the metallic scent of cold air. I started avoiding people, friends, extended family, everyone except my parents and my therapist. When people asked how I was doing, I'd smile and say better, like that word could cover the cracks in my foundation. But the cracks only spread. It wasn't just what had happened to me. It was how the people around me reacted to it. My mother, for example, she apologized once, through tears, but something in her tone felt detached, as if she was grieving her own shame more than my pain. I don't think she ever forgave herself for not speaking up when she first suspected something. One night, I asked her outright, "Why didn't you say anything?" She flinched. I was scared. Of what? Of him. Or of being right. She didn't answer. Maybe there was no good answer. Meanwhile, the news about Uncle Mark spread. Not just locally. His case made national headlines. Youth mentor turned predator, they called him. Photos from his charity work, smiling with children, juxtaposed with the cold mugshot they printed in every article. It made me sick. And yet, I read every one of them. I wanted the world to know. I wanted people to remember his face and never trust him again. But part of me also wanted the validation. Proof that he was real, that I wasn't imagining the nightmare that had haunted me in flashes and feelings for most of my life. One of the articles mentioned that at least 3 more victims had come forward. Boys, aged between 9 and 13, just like I was. I didn't know their names, but I knew their pain, and I hated that we were connected by him. The support from strangers, oddly, helped. After I shared parts of my story online, people began reaching out. Survivors, advocates, people who said things like, "You helped me put a name to what I felt," or "Now I know I wasn't the only one." It was strange, feeling seen by strangers more than by my own blood. But I welcomed it. The hardest moment came a few months after the trial. My father sat me down and said, "I'm writing a letter to the parole board. I want to make sure he never gets out." I nodded. He hesitated. "Would you write one too?" At first, I resisted. The idea of spending any more energy on Mark made my skin crawl. But after a while, I realized it wasn't about Mark. It was about me, about standing up and saying, he took something, and I remember now, and he should never hurt anyone else. So I wrote the letter. It was raw, angry, but honest. And when I mailed it, I felt something shift. A small release, like a knot that had been tied around my throat had loosened, just a little. There's something strange about trying to reclaim joy after trauma. It almost feels like betrayal, like you're not allowed to laugh again. But joy crept in quietly. It came in the form of art. I started sketching again. I painted one night until 3 a.m., hands stained with color and tears drying on my cheeks. I didn't know what I was painting at first, just that it felt like something that needed to exist. When it was done, I realized it was a boy, small, alone, standing at the edge of a forest. But he wasn't afraid. He was looking back at the trees, face lit by dawn. A year passed. Then 2. I moved into a new place. Different town. No memories. No ghosts in the hallways. I built a small routine. Wake up, walk by the lake, make coffee, write for an hour. Some days were harder than others. But slowly, the pain became manageable. Less like drowning, more like a scar I could trace with my fingers without flinching. I started seeing someone. Her name was Leah. We met through mutual friends, and I told her the truth early on. Not all of it, not at first, but enough to let her know I carried something heavy. She didn't flinch. She listened. She asked questions when appropriate and offered silence when I needed it. Being loved gently is a strange thing after years of chaos. Sometimes I'd pull away, flinch at kindness, wait for the betrayal that never came. But she was patient, and eventually, I let myself believe she wasn't going to hurt me. Uncle Mark died in prison 2 years into his sentence. I got the news via email from the DA's office. Natural causes. I didn't cry. I didn't feel joy either. Just stillness. Like the final page of a long, miserable chapter had turned itself. I visited his grave once. Not to mourn, not even to forgive. Just to stand there, alive while he wasn't. I brought nothing. No flowers. No stones. Just myself. I stood in silence for a while, then whispered, "I survived you," and I walked away. Part 5. Light After Ashes. It's strange how endings aren't really endings. Uncle Mark died. The trial was over. The dust had settled. But inside me, something still stirred. Something unfinished, not yet whole. Trauma doesn't vanish. It lingers, latches onto the quiet moments, whispering in the cracks of your day. But healing whispers back. I kept going to therapy, week after week. Sometimes I talked. Sometimes I just sat in silence. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred, a space where the broken parts of me could breathe. One day, my therapist asked, "Do you think you've forgiven him?" I sat with the question longer than I expected. "No," I finally said. "I don't think I need to." She nodded gently. Forgiveness isn't always necessary for peace. That's something no one tells you growing up. that you're allowed to walk away without tying a neat little bow on your pain, that some people don't deserve your forgiveness, and that withholding it isn't bitterness, it's protection. I started journaling again, not about the abuse, at least not directly. I wrote about the boy I used to be, about the boy who loved tree houses and sour candy and video games in dark basements before the darkness took on another meaning. I wrote letters to him, and one night I wrote, "You were never weak. You were surviving." That was the night I cried not from pain, but from relief. My relationship with my parents changed too, especially my mom. We had one last conversation, the kind where everything is on the table and nothing is safe. I told her how her silence had hurt me more than she could know, how it wasn't just what happened, but the years I spent not knowing what happened, the years I felt something was wrong with me, broken, but couldn't name it. She cried, not the way she had before, shallow, rehearsed guilt, but something deeper. She admitted that she hadn't just been scared of destroying the family. She was scared of confronting her own complicity, of looking at what she chose to ignore. And then she said something I'll never forget. "I failed you, and I don't deserve your trust, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn a piece of it back." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't expect it. And maybe that's why, slowly, I began to trust her again. Leah and I grew closer. We moved in together. She helped me decorate a small art studio in the spare room, filled with sunlight and blank canvases. I painted more, not just darkness now, but color. Trees, skies, children running. Sometimes I'd still paint storm clouds, but now they had light breaking through. She once said, watching me work, "You paint like someone who remembers what it's like to be trapped, but also knows what it's like to be free." Maybe that's the best compliment I've ever received. One morning, I got an email from the mother of one of Mark's other victims. I hadn't expected it. She found my blog, where I had started to write anonymously about healing, trauma, and survival, and recognized details. She wanted me to know her son had read it, that it helped him speak up, that he didn't feel alone anymore. I wept reading it, because that boy, he could have been me. And maybe by telling my story, I gave him something I never had, a voice that spoke before the silence swallowed everything. That's why I kept writing. Not because it was easy, but because someone, somewhere, might need to hear it. It's been almost 5 years now. I'm not the same person I was when this began. I don't flinch when someone calls me brave. I don't shrink away from my past. I own it. Not because I asked for it, but because I survived it. And in owning it, I've turned it into something else. My trauma is not my identity. It's a part of me, yes. But so is resilience. So is hope. So is the fire that refused to die out when the world tried to smother it. I still have bad days, but now I know they pass. And on the good days, I laugh harder, love deeper, live fuller, because I know what it means to be afraid of the dark and to find your way back into the light. To anyone who's reading this, who has ever been betrayed, silenced, ignored, or broken, your pain is real. Your voice matters. You deserve to be whole again. And you are not alone. Not anymore. Andrew. End of story.